and now in the last hours of his life. Elisha is soon to pass away, and he lays upon his deathbed, and he is visited by the weeping King Joash, who knows that Israel is about to enter into a terrifying new era, because unlike Elijah, Elisha has no successor. This caused me to pause and think for a moment, would I rather be Elijah or would I rather be Elisha? Elisha had the double portion. He performed the double amount of notable miracles. He was used by God tremendously, more than Elijah. But would I rather be Elisha with a double portion, or would I rather be Elijah who had a successor? In thinking about this and meditating on this, I think as a side note to my message, I would rather have a successor than to be doubly anointed. Because to have a successor means that my legacy is carried on, my anointing is carried on. And Elijah, though he didn't have the double portion, he had a part in Elisha's growth. And so he played a part in 3 times the amount of effect that Elijah had than what he had in his own life. He had 3 times that effect because he was able to engage Elisha. Elisha left no successor. And so the king came, King Joash came to Elijah, and he was saddened, or Elisha rather, he was saddened, and he wept at his deathbed, and he was hoping that there would be something transferred to him, because it was Elisha that said to Elijah those same words, those words of, "Oh, my father, my father." It was the same words that said the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. That same phrase, that same words that Elisha used with Elijah, now King Joash was using with Elisha. And I believe that he used those same words in hoping that there would be some transmittance of the anointing from Elisha to King Joash. And so with these words, Joash explains, "Oh, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof." These words were used very commonly in that day, but they were to acknowledge that there was real power and there was real authority that rested in the man to whom these words were explained. And so Elisha, he received these words, and he heard these words, and he knew that he had expressed these same words to Elijah, his mentor. And so he began the process in that very moment to transfer something to King Joash. King Elisha had no patience with the pleasantries. He is a man who knows that he is fighting a losing battle against the relentless pursuit of time. A man who knows that his very minutes are numbered. A man who knows that his appointed time with eternity is now imminent. He does not acknowledge the compliment by receiving them and thanking him. He just begins at that moment to begin to bark out orders, because in these orders, in these words that he is about ready to say, they carry great weight and they carry great significance. He says to King Joash, "Take up a bow and arrow. Put your hand upon the bow and open the window westward and shoot." And this was the command, and Elisha came alongside the king, put his hand upon the king's hand, and told the king to pull back the bow. He was saying, "I am transferring something to you. What I'm about to tell you is of great significance." Church, there is an important principle here, that we should not strive to live our life for God without a man of God in our life. We need to approach the men of God in our life in a way that we approach them with reverence and expectancy, saying that God is going to use this man to help me and to guide me. It should not be such a casual relationship where we feel like there is nothing to be imparted, but in fact God has appointed over each of us a man of God to help us and to guide us. I have men of God that speak to me into my life, and I hope that I can speak life into you as well. There is a point that God has given to each of us where we submit ourselves to the men of God because He's going to direct us in the way that we should go. And so it was with King Joash. Joash's hand came upon the bow, and the prophet's hand came upon Joash's hand. And he said, I want you to pull back this bow, and I want you to shoot it. So he pulls back the bow, and he releases it. And Elisha rouses himself to confidently declare the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. This is not just an arrow. You're not target practicing with me. This arrow means something. There's significance. There's prophetic utterance that is related to this arrow. King, I need you to understand something, that there is something important and something of great significance related to the shooting of this bow. The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek till thou hast consumed them. I want you to understand that this arrow represents the power of God to deliver Israel out of the hand of your adversary. And it is the will of God that you consume them utterly and completely. And this arrow represents that deliverance. Now, if you were told such a thing, if you were told that what the arrow represented, what would you do with those arrows? If they represented something of high importance, it represented a destiny for not just you, but for your entire nation. If the significance of that arrow was made known to you, what would you do with it? Hindsight is always 20/20, and we can read the effect of the arrow in the story, and we can speculate about what we would do if we were in King Joash's position. And so we would look at that situation and we would say, I wouldn't do it the way that he did it. We can look back at Adam and Eve and we can say they brought such pain and misery into the world by their disobedience. If I were them, I would not have done it. Problem is that it's only speculation. And I challenge us, rather, instead of looking at them specifically and comparing ourselves to them on what they did versus what we would do, I would look at our lives now in the present and ask yourself, are you pursuing it with everything that you have? Are you pursuing the things of God with a great intensity where when somebody looks back at your life, they would say, I would do it exactly the way that they did it? If somebody in the future would look back with hindsight and say, that's the way I want to do it. So Elisha proclaimed what the arrow of the Lord represented. When Joash is just, maybe he's just humoring the old man, or maybe he realizes that the event is prophetic, or what is about to happen is prophetic. We don't know at this point. But I get the sense from the story that the reason that King Joash came into that death chamber room where the prophet was going to die was he was hoping that there would be one last word given to him, one last impartation of wisdom, one last impartation of anointing. For the way that he addressed the prophet was a very specific address, the same address that Elisha used when talking to his mentor Elijah. I think he walked in there with some expectancy. I think he walked into that room with some kind of desire that God was going to do something miraculous and impart unto him something. So Elisha says, take the arrows now, and I want you to smite upon the ground. The king pauses, uncertain exactly how to continue. Until this moment, his instructions have been straightforward and they've been detailed. He has been told exactly what to do and even how to do it. But what does he do now? What does he do in this situation? If there was really a prophetic significance to this arrow of deliverance, then it must matter how he must proceed. But the old prophet simply glares at him as if to say, what are you waiting for? What's your pause? I asked you to get the bow, and I asked you to shoot the ground. I asked you to shoot those arrows into the ground. What are you waiting for? So now Joash is beginning to sense the urgency. Somehow in his hands is the destiny of his life and of his entire nation. What he holds in his hand is this bow and these arrows. And in those things signify either victory or defeat. And Joash does what the teacher asked him to do. The teacher is silent now, and all of heaven waits with bated breath to see what this pupil has learned. What do I do now? Church of the living God, warriors of worship, warriors of prayer, people of God, if I can impart something unto us today, can you sense an important prophetic utterance that is your life, that as we live for Christ, as we witness, as we open our mouth, as we share the gospel, as we go to work, as we live our life in service unto our God, that there is something prophetic and something powerful. If we can get an understanding that the bow in your hand and the arrows in your hand, they mean something. They are significant. Or do you just see regular arrows, just a regular life, an ordinary existence? I've got news for the church that you are called of God. There is a calling upon your life. You are a peculiar people. You are a royal priesthood. There is meaning and purpose in your life that is more than just waking up, eating food, working the day and going to bed at night and living from day to day, just existing. But rather there is a prophetic to your life that has eternal consequences, and we cannot just be holding the arrows, but rather we need to shoot them with intensity and with purpose. Have you decided to smite the kingdom of darkness through sheer anointed determination? Or do you have a few memorized cliches to fire at your enemy? They say only time will tell. That's the truth. But here's a greater truth. Only you will tell. There is a will that God has given to each of us. There is a choice that each of us make. I reject any doctrine that says that we are simply autonomons, that simply float around as puppets, and we just do whatever some greater power has over us. No, God created each of us with a will to do his will or not. That's why we have to pray, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Not my will, God, but your will. So we choose whether or not we're going to move forward into eternity with purpose on our lips and purpose in our spirit, or if we're just going to just float through life and hope everything works out all right. At the very moment when the miraculous could have happened, Joash fumbled the ball and settled for a mediocre and for the mundane. He settled for the average and the okay. This seems okay to me. With half-hearted hands, he took the arrows and he smote the ground once, twice, and 3 times, and then stopped. He had more arrows in his quiver. He had more opportunity to shoot. He had more skill to use. He had more energy to pull back the bow. He had more reserves. He had more power that he could have used. But rather, he just pulled the arrow back, and 3 times he pulled back and shot into the ground. And then he was done. There was more to give. There was more energy to pour out. There was more arrows to shoot. There was more time that he had. He could have given a little bit more. He was just satisfied with just taking the least amount of effort. He was just turning his head to look for the prophet's approval after shooting those 3 arrows when Elisha roused himself in anger and shouted in spite of his sickness. And verse 19 says, and the man of God was wroth with him and said, thou shouldest have smitten 5 or 6 times. Then hast thou smitten Syria till thou hast consumed it, whereas now thou shalt smite Syria but 3 times. This was an indictment against King Joash, not because he had more arrows to shoot, because his zeal was not what it should have been. He was okay with the mediocre. He was okay with the average. He was okay with just shooting just a little bit and just being satisfied with it. I did a little good. I shot 3 times in the ground. I'm okay. But God never asks us to be half-hearted. God never asks us to be just partly in. He's never asked us to be a mix of 2 different things. He said, if you're going to serve me, do it all with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. If you're going to love me, do it with all that you are. Church of the living God, warriors of worship, if I can tell you this morning, we need to be engaged in our Father's business with all that we are. Suddenly and regrettably, Joash realized to his shame that the first arrow was prophetic, but the remaining arrows were purely and simply a test of zeal, and he has failed the test utterly. It was a test whether or not he was committed or not. Syria will not be defeated, only smitten 3 times. The unnecessary battles and the pointless skirmishes will rage on for generations, even to the modern times. Just read your news this morning. Because Joash took his place